Good evening. My name is Bryan Doerries, and I'm the artistic director of Theater of War Productions. I'm a white man in his mid-40s, blue eyes and a beard, and wearing a blue painter's jacket. And when my daughter depicts me in drawings, I have 3 hairs on my head. But currently, I'd like to think I have a few more left at this moment. Theater of War Productions is a social impact company that uses live performances as a tool for helping communities address pressing public health and social issues. And we're thrilled that you could join us tonight for our presentation of The World on Fire: Ecology, Poetry, and Disability Justice, an evening of readings and dialogue among distinguished poets and the young poets of tomorrow, a chorus of diverse voices exploring the transformative power of words. The World on Fire is presented as part of the National Poetry Coalition's exploration of the theme, "It is burning, it is dreaming, it is waking up, poetry and environmental justice." Before getting started, I want to highlight that tonight's event will feature closed captioning in English, communication access real-time translation, or CART, in English, in a separate browser window. We'll be, in a moment, chatting that to you, that link. American Sign Language interpretation, ASL interpretation, and image descriptions. And to access the live captions at the bottom of your screen, please activate them now at the bottom, where you can also adjust the font size. To access CART in a separate window, please click on the link provided in the confirmation email for tonight's event, or for those of you who missed it, we're going to send that out right now via chat. We're delighted to be co-presenting tonight's event with an amazing group of partners, including the Alliance for Young Artists and Writers, the Office of Interdisciplinary Programs and Outreach at the Burton Blatt Institute, 9 Mile Press, Wordgathering, a journal of disability and poetry literature, and the International Writing Program. I'd like to extend my special thanks to all of our partners for helping make the World on Fire possible. I'd also like to recognize and thank the staff of the Alliance for Young Artists and Writers and their National Student Poets Program, the nation's highest honor for young poets, grades 10 and 11, creating original work. Annually, 5 students are selected for 1 year of service, each representing a different geographic region of the country. The program believes in the power of youth voices to create and sustain meaningful change, and supports them in being heard. The National Student Poets Program is supported by the Institute of Museum and Library Services, the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, the Wunderkinder Foundation, the Poetry Foundation, and the Academy of American Poets. And now it's my absolute honor to kick things over to my wonderful co-facilitator for tonight's event, the poet, Diane R. Wiener. Diane.
Thanks. Thank you, Bryan. I'm so delighted to be here. I'm going to have my camera in the vertical or portrait version here so that I can access people a little more easily than would otherwise be the case. And I'm just thrilled to be with you. And I have some remarks that I will read so that I can stay on point. And so I want to say I'm again honored and delighted to be with you. And I'm Diane Wiener, the lead editor of Wordgathering, wordgathering.com, the journal of disability, poetry, and literature. I'm also a research professor and the associate director of interdisciplinary programs and outreach at the Burton Blatt Institute. I'll wait a moment so the interpreters can keep up. Don't want to be inaccessible, of course not, on the contrary. And I'm a white Ashkenazi Jew who is female presenting. I'm gender nonconforming. I'm Crip, mad, and neuroqueer. And as Bryan said, thank you, Bryan, I'm a poet. I have long salt and pepper hair and green metal framed glasses with bifocals, I will add. So I'll be doing this a lot with my reading tonight with you. I'm wearing a black suit jacket over a teal button-down collared shirt. I'm seated in my dining room in upstate New York in front of artwork on a maroon painted wall. And I'm so looking forward, and not just visually, to our wonderful conversation tonight. I want to send regrets from my friend and colleague, Professor Stephen Kuusisto, who is unable to be with us this evening owing to not feeling well. I will be performing some of the duties that had been assigned to Stephen, and he sends his very best regards to everyone here. Thanks so much, Bryan.
Thank you, Diane. Tonight's event will unfold in 3 parts. First, a group of distinguished poets, national student poets, and young emerging poets will read a selection of poems that they have collectively curated for tonight's program. This evening, we are thrilled to be joined by the poets Ona Gritz, Ekiwah Adler-Belendez, Taylor Brorby, Camisha Jones, Maddy Dietz, Christian Butterfield, Alondra Uribe, David James Savarese, DJ Savarese, and Christopher Costello, and of course, Diane R. Wiener. And for tonight's reading, we've asked each of the distinguished poets to select a poem by a young emerging poet to read, with whom they've been paired. And we've asked each of the young emerging poets to select a poem by one of the distinguished poets to read. So already in their selections of each other's work, the poets have begun an intergenerational dialogue that we hope to build upon in the discussion that will grow out of the performance. When the poets are done with the reading, around 20 to 30 minutes in, my co-facilitator, Diane, and I will kick off a conversation with the group of 10 poets by asking a series of framing questions about what we heard tonight and how it resonates with the intersecting themes of ecology, poetry, and disability justice. And after we've heard from some of the poets on screen, about 15, 20 minutes later, we'll open up the floor to what we hope will be a lively, healing, constructive discussion with you, our audience, out there in the world watching on Zoom. During the discussion, we'll continue to ask questions and help frame the dialogue to come. And if you'd like to answer one of those questions or jump into the conversation, we ask that you use the raise your hand function on Zoom, the hand, to indicate you have something to say. For each question, we'll call upon a number of people who raise their hands and promote them to the screen for the duration of their remarks. This is still new territory for us, a new way of performing, a new way of communicating. So we apologize in advance for the fact that we're not going to be able to get to everyone who raises their hand in the discussion. And there likely will be glitches and technical issues during the event, but that's okay. Making mistakes and overcoming them is at the center of our model. Our hope is that by making mistakes and then adapting and moving on from them, we are modeling for you as an audience what we hope you will do during the discussion. We hope you will join us by taking the risk of making a mistake or not sounding brilliant or polished, in order to be present in the moment with each other, even in isolation, without judgment and with shared vulnerability. This is what makes us human, and it's the only way out of this mess. So, without further ado, I'm going to turn things over to our incredible group of poets for tonight's presentation of The World on Fire, Ecology, Poetry, and Disability Justice. And our first poets tonight are Maddy and Camisha. Maddy, over to you.
Hi everyone, I'm Maddy Dietz. I am the current national student poet representing the Midwest, and I'm a senior in high school. I am a white woman with long brown hair, and I'm wearing a white patterned shirt and glasses and big earrings. And I am so thrilled tonight to have the honor of reading Camisha Jones's work. Disclosure by Camisha L. Jones. I'm sorry, could you repeat that? I'm hard of hearing. To the cashier, to the receptionist, to the insistent man asking directions on the street. I'm sorry, I'm hard of hearing. Could you repeat that? At the business meeting, in the writing workshop, on the phone to make a doctor's appointment. I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, I'm hard for the hearing. Repeat. Repeat. Hello, my name is Sorry to full rooms of strangers. I'm hard to hear. I vomit apologies everywhere. They fly on bat wings towards whatever sound beckons. I'm sorry, I am so, so sorry, and repeating and not hearing. Dear again, I regret to inform you, I am here. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Maddy. That was such a gift to hear you read that poem. I appreciate it. And I have the honor to read a poem by Maddy. I am Camisha Jones. I am a brown-skinned woman who is wearing glasses. I have natural hair with purple streaks in it. I am wearing a gray V-neck blouse. I use she, her pronouns. And I'm coming to you from Northern Virginia, where I work remotely for the national nonprofit Split This Rock. And I'll now get to read a poem by Maddy Dietz, Companions, the Earth, and How to Survive It. Do not smile just because you wish it was over. Cry because it is happening. Give your personal cell phone number to anger and ask her to kiss you tenderly after the third date. Count the numbers in your head. How many millions dying? For how many dollars? Do the division. Your life value is $25,649.43, approximately. Darling, you are one drop of cash flow in a world drowning with it. But you are a body with teeth and nails. Can you claw? And may I? Anger is a good companion. See how she wraps my shoulders in her yellow jacket, how she shields me to think on the train ride back home. And I have been thinking, one drop alone is a nuisance, but if we hold one another, if we make our own blood of covenant of old, we can flood basements. We can be the 2 inches of water at the bottom of a plastic bucket with warnings on the side. We can drown those who try to drown us in words and laws and bills that we pen in waterproof ink. Thank you.
Thank you. That was astounding. That was amazing to hear.
Thank you both. For our next pair of poets, we'll be inviting Ekiwah and Alondra. Oh, Ekiwah, you are still muted.
Thank you. I'm honored to be here in this very special and unusual event. I'm Ekiwah, and I'm coming to you from Mexico, a small town in Morelos, where I'm still lucky enough for the light to go out. I identify as disabled and writing from a wheelchair, and I'm the proud father of a 6-year-old son. Here we go. Honored to read the beginning of the end of everything by Alondra Uribe. Let there be lightning and thunder and cracks of electromagnetic whiplashes among the sky. Let there be glorious hallelujahs and the shaking of bedrocks in Rio Piedras. You just had to be there. My thighs cracked the earth open, making the mountains spring back and bringing lava straight out of the core, through the mallet, out to the crust and onto the cosmos. The writings on the wall were no longer writings, but music scriptures. Everything was in its becoming, including myself. There was being born, but we're talking about life now, like shucking and bucking an entire intergalactic void off your back, like breathing from all parts of your body, like growing eyes, and your eyes growing souls, and your soul bringing all the magic out from the maple trees. That's what it takes to make me alive. thank you, Alondra. What I resonate so much in this poem is that it talks about that moment of the earth beginning or nature, but then it says it's all about not just the ecstasies and that great creation that happened in the past, but what is happening now as we gather in song and poetry, in orgasmic joy. And I think with all the challenges that we face and climate change, one of the answers will be that whatever solutions come, we'll have to be thinking on our feet, so to speak, with that joy. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Ekiwah, for that. That poem will now forever live inside the both of us. Thank you so much. My name is Alondra Uribe. I am a 19-year-old brown-skinned girl with medium-length curly hair. I'm currently wearing a red shirt with a silver chain necklace and lots of makeup on. And I am thrilled and honored and all warm inside to be reading After EAB by Ekiwah. Wait, let me correct myself. I'm so thankful to be reading Adler-Belendez After EAB. So here we go. Oh, Ekiwah. You pig sniffing language with your long verbal snout. It's taking you a long time to begin to follow your own advice. Even before you were fully born, you were chanting all, and now, raring to go, impatient for this world, for human voices, bodies, oxygen, poems, and peaches, born weighing 900 grams, the size of a mango cupped in one hand, turning purple trying to breathe, with death like a silver dog at your heels. You couldn't wait to know the insufferable ecstasy of bodies' weight, and you insisted to drag any stars you could carry, even if their radiance almost burned you alive, as they protected you from the black holes and vacant tides, stiff-lagged, panting, crying, and greedy for your life. You said, bring it on. Yes, for this, I'm willing to be man by day, gargoyle by night, oink, oink here and there, seeking the muddy, seeking the divine, swamps of pleasure, pigging out, we, yes, yes, all the way home. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ekiwah and Alondra. Next up, we have Diane and Christopher, and Diane will be going first, reading Christopher's poem.
I just have to say that the first time I saw this poem is when Chris shared it as part of a beautiful essay he wrote that I invited him to submit to Wordgathering. And we had a beautiful conversation about whether it would be meaningful to add a poem to accompany this prose piece. And I did not know at the time that I would have the enormous honor of reading this in public in this particular context and in this moment. So it gives me great pleasure to share with you Mandrake by Christopher Costello. All rootedness is temporary. I know this by now. It's a kind of ambient knowledge, a bone ache insistence. Every harbor is a poor one. No shelter adds up to its vision. And yet, here you are at my door. You sought me out, offered your name again. Your tongue tripped over the syllables as though inventing it for the first time. Just hearing it made so much seem possible. I wanted to plant myself in your good soil, wait for something to grow. Please sit, help yourself to anything. Thank you, Chris, for that poem, and thank you all for the honor of letting me read it to you.
Thank you so much, Diane, for that incredibly evocative and generous reading and for your initial generosity in publishing this poem. My name is Chris Costello. I'm a white man with glasses and a white hoodie and hair that is more unkempt than it ought to be at the moment. I'm an undergrad at Hobart and William Smith Colleges in New York in English and Queer Studies, and I have the absolute honor of reading poems by both Diane Wiener and Steve Kuusisto, who couldn't be here to read tonight, but who is with us always in spirit, and I hope is tuning in now. Old Horse, What is to be Done by Stephen Kuusisto for Robert Bly. I also want to live tonight. My pockets filled with ghost silver, the real coins I spent long ago. There are weeks, whole months when I read only the ancients. I mean the dark one, the river compulsive, a man who made clocks from string. Time is a game played beautifully by children. Lately, this is all I can think of. When I was very small, I lived by a meadow. You loved me, and I wasn't confused. Thank you. And then this next poem is Ithaca on Labor Day by Diane R. Wiener. I don't know why the bugs won't stop, why that car was crushed but not this one, why the sea star teemed, why the angle of light, why the refutation, why the new old dead beat, why the solace, why the inconsolable, why the trees are stolen when no one owns them in the first place, why the first place is no progenitor is a lawless, fissured Ecclesiastes. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Diane and Chris, and thanks, Chris, for taking on both poems at short notice. I appreciate that very much. Grateful to you both for jumping in different ways. Next, we have Ona and DJ. Ona, over to you. Oh, Ona, you are still muted as well.
How about now?
Perfect.
Okay, great. Well, I guess before I describe myself, I will give a moment to this painting, which is a painting of a female looking face with green long hair on a blue and green background. The painting is called Wood Nymph, and the poem, it's by Malcolm Corley. And the poem that I'm going to read is by DJ Savarese, and it's an ekphrastic poem based on this painting, also called Wood Nymph.
Hold on one sec, Ona, before you go. Marjolaine, yeah, great, terrific. Go ahead, Ona, please.
Okay, great, thanks. So my name is Ona Gritz, and I am so happy to be here this evening. I'm a poet and an essayist outside of Philadelphia. I've got salt and pepper, wavy shoulder length hair and glasses. I am wearing a blue patterned blouse and a black sweater, and I'm very happy to read you this beautiful poem by DJ Savarese, Wood Nymph. Her eyes and mouth are leaves. If she could talk, she'd melt, I think, or at least evaporate. When the tree dies, so does the hamadryad, in this case, Egiros, denizen of the black poplar. To say that she is bonded to her tree is to believe too much in the spirit of distinction. She is the tree, that triangular, tooth-leafed cottonwood. When Erysiphon cut down Demeter's grove, Lemos bore like a beetle into his stomach, becoming the need to eat. And eat Erysiphon did, until he ate himself. No chainsaw is ever happy. Like the wood nymph, I live inside the grain of speech. the wood of warning. He who harms my sister shall die of insatiable hunger. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Ona.
Thank you, Ona, and thank you to Malcolm Corley, the talented artist who painted Wood Nymph. Hi, everyone. My name is David James Savarese. I am a white man in my 20s, with glasses, a goatee, and short, reddish-brown hair, wearing a quarter-zip gray sweater. I identify as an artful activist, public scholar, and practicing optimist, and I'm honored to be reading a poem by Ona Gritz. We Are Everywhere. A poem by Ona Gritz. The first one I see, on Bleecker, has a rigid leg that traces half moons as she moves. The next, spotted on Houston, uses crutches to swing her whole self forward, a leap for each of her boyfriend's strides. Right now, a woman with auburn hair and a gypsy skirt waits for the light in a motorized chair. The walk sign flashes green and, magnetized, I follow, willing her to notice I'm kin.
Thank you so much, DJ. Thank you both. And for our final pair, we have Taylor and Christian. Taylor.
Thank you. I'm Taylor Brorby. I teach environmental studies at Wofford College in South Carolina. I'm a white-skinned man with tortoiseshell glasses, longer than normal round hair, and I'm wearing a crushed blue velvet blazer and a light blue shirt. And tonight I have the great honor of reading Industrial Complex by Christian Butterfield. Industrial Complex, try fatherland. My father almost widowed his hand to a thresher. Imagine it, he says, his ring finger divorced from body, the hand emptied by steel. Yes, where I come from, we steal ourselves. We promise everything away. Industrial complex, all it takes is two good hands. The poem is industry produced. Made in America stickers my chest. Yes, where I'm from, a birth is a promise. My conveyor belt tongue, my breath spills desperate against itself. A factory line, I disassemble every vow. Industrial complex, well, the grain cradle was replaced by the reaper. The obvious metaphor, birth to death. Try fatherland because motherland implies embrace, and only so many people can make it out, you know. And yes, where I'm from, everyone knows. Everyone has so much promise. Industrial complex, try fatherland. Now try chopping the family tree through its ring, fingers still thresher warm. Yes, where I'm from, good men scatter like weeds. Every harvest empties, falls lifeless like a riddle. If a log is felled by a nine-fingered man, did its promise even count? Industrial complex? I think so. Yes, I really do. Yes, where I'm from, a birth is a promise. Broken digits litter the sidewalks. Where I'm from, useless hands scatter like weeds. No one here knows the difference between poetry and con artistry. It's all the same. Bloody fingers, sleight of mouth. Industrial complex, my hands are no good. Yes, where I'm from, the ground calluses beneath me, clenches a fist. My father almost widowed his hand to a thresher, so I wrote this poem without using my ring fingers, a testament to every promise I've built and let die within my palms. Industrial complex, try fatherland. My father once steadied me with his palms. He intends every promise he makes, but they never harvest. His hands are no good. I see reapers everywhere now. I am no empty harvest. I am no severed hand. I promise you. I promise. I promise. Industrial complex? Yes, my father once told me, somebody will always be the greatest, and damn Christian, aren't you somebody too? Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was amazing. Wow, thank you. Hi, my name is Butterfield. I am the 2019 National Student Poet of the Southeast. I am a white man. I use him pronouns. It says my internet connection is unstable right at this very moment. Great timing. I have shoulder length, brown curly hair. I have like rectangular glasses, a mustache, and I'm wearing like a green horizontal striped sweater that I think is very cute. I'm currently sitting in my closet, little small town in Kentucky, and I have the amazing honor of reading Credo by Taylor Brorby. Very excited, yay! Credo, for David James Duncan. In the beginning, God whispered the world into being, and the bluegills I love came into being, and the meadowlarks I love rattled their throats across the sage-scented prairie, because a song, desperate to come out, was inside their wind-whipped bodies, and the bison wallowed in that gray-colored mud, and the sage groused, and the sage rushed up to the tune of the coyote call rolling across bouquets, bumping over bluffs, snaking through the brown rivers of the dry heart of the continent. Nestled in the nooks and crannies and held like a lump of ignite, ready to ignite, ready to burn, to change into the scoria pebbling the roadway, streaking the brown palette of the prairie in that luscious red smeared on lips that make clergy simmer in envy. Because a friend told me that God might be the great mother that adores soft voices, the voices that slip in sideways, shifting muddy river channels, whirling wood into mighty river key, rolling a single grain of sand 1 mile every million years, over the bottom down dank mud, through the muck of a fast-moving world, the open places where ancient seabeds run, through switchgrass where our own soft voice weaves a new song. And we listen, just because it feels that damn good. Thank you.
Thank you both. Well, listen, we can't wait till we're back in person doing these types of events all together in each other's physical presence. But if we were in a physical setting, at this point, there would be, without question, for the hundreds of people tuning in, if they were with us, I know uproarious applause and hand movements and energy and smiling, appreciating and validating and acknowledging the contributions of all 10 poets who read and performed each other's work tonight. And we're just so grateful to you all for giving us your time and your energy and coming together in this way and taking the risk with us of seeing what might happen. I know it's as a performer, sometimes one gets into a rhythm of the way you perform your own texts, and sometimes hearing other people help you to gain insight into things that you've been missing perhaps all along that were right in front of you. And part of this exercise is to sort of perturb and to create new openings. And that was the idea. And also, of course, this intergenerational dialogue that you have already begun by choosing each other's poems. So thank you all so much for getting us started. And Diane, I'm just going to kick us off with our opening question, but Diane and I are going to be co-facilitating this conversation right now. And we're going to go to our poets first, as I mentioned in the intro. And then after a little while, we'll start bringing in folks from the audience. So don't raise your hand quite yet, because we want you to be responding to the thing we're talking about at the moment that you raise your hand. But when the time comes, we'll ask you to raise your hand, then we'll start bringing folks onto the screen. So the question that we like to start all of our discussions with, and all of Theater of War Productions projects are about creating the conditions for dialogue by way of poetry and other seminal texts. What openings can be created by a reading that then create a space where we can have a conversation that wasn't possible before, or a new vocabulary and a syntax that we didn't have access to before. So the question we wanted to ask, and it's one we ask if you come to our other events almost always, is what, and this is to the poets right now first who are on the screen, what resonated with you tonight in hearing these poems in the moment read by each other? What touched you? Were there specific moments or lines or things or themes that jumped out to you? What was true? We're not going to call upon anybody, but I presume that maybe one of the poets on the screen might like to kick off our conversation by responding, by either raising your hand or unmuting yourself and jumping right in. Christopher, please.
Yeah, hi everyone. I was fascinated by the presence of the body in most or all of these poems, and I was interested in the way that kind of echoes or gestures toward disability, but doesn't name it in most cases. And I think that is maybe one of the things that poetry can do uniquely, is forge these connections between the body and the environment, for instance, without naming them, but kind of allowing their association to produce its own kind of meaning in a non-didactic way, but still, of course, with a distinct bent and a kind of politics.
Thank you so much, Christopher. I really appreciate that so much. Even in the title, we've created a set of potential connections, but we haven't made the connections between those things. Just like you raised the connection between the body and being disabled or identifying as disabled, or the body and disability and ecology. And the poetry is what creates the opportunity or the possibility of making those connections, but it's an invitation, not a didactic gesture. I love that very much. Anyone else want to respond? What touched you? What resonated with you in this experience? Everything is germane.
I'd actually like to respond to what Christopher said, which was that I was thinking similarly about how physical and how personal these poems all were. And what's mirrored for me is that by giving us the opportunity not to read our own poems, but to read poems of the others, we got to put those poems into our bodies and really feel them and internalize them, and they become ours because we get to represent them.
Thank you so much, Ona. You know, we do a lot of work with communities that have experienced all kinds of different things, trauma, loss, isolation, and almost universally people say, I think people have in our discussions have come forward and said, no one can understand my experience except the person who has had the exact experience that I've had. And maybe that's true. But I love how you'd made this connection to what Christopher brought up, that the poem or the poetry and the reading of another person's poem and the taking that into one's body creates an opportunity for at least imagining, not just sensorially, but also physically and spiritually, where that poem came from. And it's an invitation maybe to try to understand another person's experience or perspective. And I love that. I love that idea. Anybody else want? Yeah, Taylor.
I think just picking up on some of that thread too, for me, it was such a gift to get Christian's poems and then get to select one, because industrial complex, my father spent his entire career working on an assembly line, and 4 generations of my family all work in the fossil fuel industry or have, and somehow they got a crunchy granola type 1 diabetic out of the deal, you know, environmentalist who has oil in his body at all times. But I'm thinking of that resonance, particularly for me with Christian's work, and seeing myself mirrored in a poem I hadn't had the good fortune of encountering before, while also thinking about the range of what we've heard tonight, everything from pigs to impermanence, to industrial economics, to hearing or the lack of sound. Who are we listening to? Who aren't we hearing or understanding? And how, for me, there's just that echo of the physicality of these poems in what Chris is pointing out to us, the body, but just even the movement of the physicality of some of these pieces, whether it's an assembly line or hogs or our eardrums, our auditory ability as well. Just the movement across these poems has been so powerful for me tonight.
Thank you so much, Taylor. Yeah, absolutely. I like the use of the word mirroring. You know, here we are in this environment where I choose to mirror myself, but I saw myself mirrored in the poem. I like that phrase a lot. My own experience. It is inherently non-didactic, non-accusatory to hear or see or experience a poem and then make that connection on your own. And when I think about environmental justice, and I also think about disability rights and disability justice, I think about what powerful vehicles poems can be for communicating something that many people aren't receptive to in normal modes of discourse. I was also really, yeah, please, Ekiwah. And Diane, anytime you want to jump in, because I know you have way more brilliant things to say than I do in terms of assimilating what's being said on screen, please do. But Ekiwah, please. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to say something that might be a little bit politically incorrect, so sorry. I was, you know, when I go out to give a reading, or when I've seen other poets with disability give a reading, within the first 5-10 minutes of the reading, I can pretty much have a rough idea, because of certain environmental cues or in the environment or the way that they get on stage. I can sort of say, well, I think this person might have a hearing impairment or visual impairment, or might be in a wheelchair. And that sort of helps me contextualize the work or not. And it was a super interesting experience to not necessarily have that reference over Zoom. And then I found myself, I that try not overthink those things, I found myself constantly wondering, are they now talking about the fact that they're deaf in this reference, blind, use wheelies, or on roller skates? So as a audience member / participant, I really would love to know how your disabilities bleed into your work, or whether that's irrelevant, and then how that possibly for each one of us really does relate to this subject of environmental justice. I know for me it begins with a little bit of a fantasy, which is having a garden that's a little raised, so I can actually be in a wheelchair and water my plants on a raised bed. And I haven't done that yet, but it looks like me getting my pants all muddied when I'm trying to weed some stuff out of the garden. And also having grown up around a town where there's a lot of talk around ecology, dry toilets, etc., hippie communes. And so what that adds up to is thinking about, the other thing that struck me about these poems is the subject of crookedness, because our bodies have this certain element of weird crookedness in them, and yet we find that that is beautiful just as it is, that it doesn't need to be subjugated or straightened out. And that's the kind of attitude that we need to start adopting with the earth if we want to see some real climate change happen. And I had never thought of that until listening to your beautiful poem. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Ekiwah. Diane, you want to jump
Yes.
in? Oh, I just want to say before you jump in, I love Ekiwah's question. And anyone at any point who'd like to respond to that question, we purposely not overemphasized disability as a framework for understanding each poem, but it is a critical framework. And to the extent you want to talk about it in the way that Ekiwah asked, that would be wonderful. But Diane, over to you, please.
I think Christian also wanted to add something, so I'll defer to Christian, and I want to thank everyone for the beautiful things everyone's already said. I do have a few thoughts. Whether they're brilliant is debatable, but thank you for your kind words, Bryan. And Christian, what was on your mind? Thank you so much.
Hi. One thing that I really loved about this reading, the thing that it really stuck together throughout all the poetry was kind of the optimism involved with the treatment of disability and ecology. Like, I'll be totally real and honest, like before I heard these poems or read these poems, and I was just kind of like thinking of what this night would be like, I kind of expected it to be a little like somber. Like, I typically, like when I think about my own neurodiversity or when I hear people's treatment and perception of disabled people or ecology, like there's a lot of negativity wrapped within it. We constantly look at it as this like huge crisis, it's a source of negativity. And I mean, honestly, like it's kind of exhausting as a disabled person constantly being looked at as a source of negativity, you know? And so I came out of this reading feeling a lot more uplifted than I expected to. You know, every poem seemed to treat like the perception of disability with this like sense of joy and vitality. I mean, there was no kind of like, I am really sad, or I am like, there was no sense of like, this is a negative thing that affects me and makes me less than, you know? And it's such a small and kind of basic thing, but when you constantly feel like there's a societal constant that you are just a little bit less than, or that it's inherently a flaw, just this like perception that like, not only is it not like a minor flaw, it's not even a flaw at all, it's just a part of living that deserves to be celebrated via poetry. I think that's like really impactful and empowering. And I found myself being moved by that more than I like really expected to. I didn't quite expect to feel uplifted and like feeling like safe and secure and comfortable in myself after this. And I was like, yay, go me, go disabled people, we rock. And I didn't know that was the feeling I was gonna feel, and I'm feeling it, and that is very fun.
I really appreciate what you said, and I want to add that I think you also, you're describing your shirt set a framework for the conversation in a way that I wasn't anticipating, and I thought that was wonderful. And one of the things I want to highlight and underscore is that a number of other people wanted to add things and share contributions, and so I'm going to keep sort of pulling back because I would rather hear what other people have to say, but I'm happy to chime in as well, and not just auditorily, of course not. So Alondra, you wanted to add something, and so has DJ something to add. So Alondra, please go ahead. Thank you so much, Christian.
Yes, I just wanted to comment on this idea that kept resurfacing in my mind throughout the sharing, and even during our rehearsal period before we had gotten started, is this this idea of environmental justice, and how to some or to the audience, you know, throwing that word out there, environmental, I get a lot of like solar panels and like dirt and, you know, stereotypical environmentally friendly things. Dirt is environmentally friendly, but it's sort of like taking this idea, what I saw throughout a couple of poems, and something that I picked up between mine and Ekiwah's poems was this idea of taking the environment, but expanding it and making something that lives within us and not just something that we live in, and thinking about Earth and how we take care of where we are, and that sort of reflects how we take care of ourselves, and how nature sort of plays a part in, I'm sorry, I just lost my train of thought, and how nature plays this this part in storytelling, and how the storytelling, you know, reveals itself to just be a bigger part of nature. That's something played in my head a lot.
Well, that was beautiful, and it made sense to me. And I think sometimes, for what it's worth, when we articulate something and it kind of unfolds as we're saying it, there's a kind of poetry to that after all. So I really appreciated what you said, Alondra. So let's see, DJ, what would you like to share? Thank you so much.
Some poems make the connections between disability and climate justice explicit, and others don't, but it all feels the same to me. Like the earth, our beingness is less seen, less valued. Camisha could be the earth at a hearing of Congress, and I could be the wood nymph. I make myself less visible in my poem, but I'm still omnipresent in it. I love Malcolm Corley's painting and clearly fell in love with the wood nymph because she is who I want to be, and she's almost not able to be distinguished from her environment. And maybe we aren't either. Can I ask why? I think it's because we are in and of our environment. It matters because we aren't whole without each other. I love that idea that we're not able without one another, and without one another, we're connected but not as we should be. I mention this not because I have lost my focus, but because I'm freshly able to open myself beyond the mirage of my own skin, beyond the misperceptions and misconception of my body's boundary. What I love most about the disability rights movement is that it asked us to abolish all forms of discrimination toward all people, not just toward the disabled. These days I've unearthed my own human-centered bias, realizing discrimination expands beyond the human, and understanding that we are all interdependent parts of the same ecosystem.
Thank you, DJ. I think one of your points that I wanted to underscore, and of the many things that have been said or shared in various ways already, articulated in different forms, I think the idea that there's affect and emotion that poetry brings us that is, I think, specific and unique in that particular genre of creativity, although it certainly happens in painting and in prose and in music and in many other forms of expression. And the idea that some people talk about like a crip lit, or taking the idea of crip and reclaiming it in a positive way, or having people who have been historically oppressed reclaiming language for ourselves. So there's this movement called Echo Crip, you know, that explicitly links ecology and disability justice. And I think that although that's not explicitly the themes of that's not explicitly the theme of the evening, it comes up in listening to all these poems, even hearing my own poem, which of course I wrote, but hearing it communicated by you, Chris, did definitely affect me in a way that I wasn't anticipating. So I want to thank you for that very greatly. And so one of the things that's interesting to me is like the reading of poems before and then being in the now of that. It's sort of like mutual aid, what I heard you describing, DJ. So in the disability rights movement, you know, there's this notion of mutual aid that's actually been taken up by non-disabled people who, some of whom are finally like, oh yeah, there's this thing called interdependence, and it actually has to happen for everybody. And and I'm not saying that with laughter entirely without sarcasm, but so anyway, there's a kind of relationship between disability justice and poetry in this pandemic that has raised the specter, and again, not just visually, of the concept of mutual aid and the way that people and ecology and creatures and the landscape and the seascape are mutually informing each other, which I think we can learn a lot about from the disability rights movement. And I guess just another point I was going to say is that I kept noticing wordplay being used, and it kept making me think about how we steward words and how we steward the land. And there's a kind of pragmatic, joyful, not romanticized redemption in these poems, which I found really provocative and moving. So those are just some thoughts that I had listening to everyone and being in company with you.
Thank you so much, Diane. I know Maddy would like to say something, and of course, Ekiwah, you had your hand up too, but let's go to Maddy. I just also want to say I was so moved, DJ, when you said we're not able without each other. I think that was how you phrased it, but that word able really hit me hard tonight in this context, and thinking about beyond the themes, just the way forward as a planet during this pandemic, the collectivism and the interdependence that's actually required of us all to emerge from this incredibly traumatic and trying year and change. And so, beyond even the themes of the evening, I was really touched by that idea. And it's touching to see it on Zoom for me. People talk about Zoom fatigue. I'll never get tired of being on Zoom when we're doing something sacred on it. And it seems to be that this is just one of many technologies, including the one that DJ is utilizing to communicate with us, that channel something metaphysical and spiritual and make it audible and visible in ways that until recently we weren't able to, as a species, accomplish. And that to me gives me immense hope too. And it's so exciting to hear it and see it and feel it in a medium that keeps being sort of vilified as being soulless. It just requires souls, and soulfulness in order to actually function. I'll stop before I sound too esoteric, but I just wanted to acknowledge all of that. Maddy, over to you.
Absolutely. What DJ said reminded me a lot of Christian and Ekiwah's poems, how like the land informs the body and the body exists within the context of the land and is a part of the land. And that was making me think of how environmental justice has a lot to do with being kind to our own bodies and minds and to the bodies of those around us. It's like a form of protection, both for ourselves and for everyone, every single person. So I think there's something wonderful and beautiful about demanding justice for the land and for our own bodies and for the bodies of those we care about.
Thank you so much, Maddy. Ekiwah, you had your hand. Oh, you're muted again, though. I appreciate everyone so diligently muting themselves. Thank you.
So what also comes to mind from all this is a time that I was in the Institute of Critical Studies in Mexico City in a panel, and each year they had a different theme, and this was the year's theme was climactic chaos, because they don't like to call it climate change, it's climate chaos, let's be clear, they say. And then a panel around disability came up, and I thought, whoa, what are people gonna say? Are they gonna be making green wheelchairs or what? And I listened to the testimony of mothers that were in very polluted areas near certain rivers in Puebla, where the level of pollution in the rivers was so high that then their children were being born without limbs or being born deaf or acquiring some sort of disability. And so it made me think that perhaps disability will be, for the better and the worse, a more and more shared human condition as climate change progresses. And also facetiously, I like to think that if you're not disabled now, it's just a question of time before you join us.
Thank you, Ekiwah. Say that part again, sorry.
Because bodies age, and that in itself is a kind of disability which leads us to lean on each other in dance and song.
Thank you for saying all that and for sharing all that. And one of the things I didn't know exactly how this would unfold is now unfolding, which is the unpredictability of energy and how people's responses are informing each other in a kind of ecology of its own. It's really beautiful. And I think Taylor wanted to add something. Taylor, what's on your mind? Thank you so much, Ekiwah.
I just feel like, Ekiwah, you've been telegraphing me your energy, because I was just sitting here going, yes, yes, I am with you. I keep thinking, because of the technology we're broadcasting through, because of my disability, my life is greatly at risk because of this pandemic. And so I've largely been home 24/7 for the past year, and am grateful for technology like this and how we communicate. And when you're a disabled person at home full-time, this is a wonderful restorative night to be a part of this energy. And to your point, Ekiwah, that I'm thinking about is, I really believe in this century, disabled people are so well poised to articulate not only the moment we are in, but where we are moving into. And I think about that with my own disability of the erosion of diabetes, to me is exactly like the erosion of the buttes where I come from in Western North Dakota. And what does a long life of erosion mean in my home landscape, given the reality of climate change? What can my disability illuminate to others about what it feels like to be worn down because your blood sugar is high or it's low, and to be able to imagine that future, like you're so expertly saying, that our bodies erode and others are joining us. It's just a matter of time. And I think that's part of the spirit of tonight, that it's been a balm for me to feel less alone in my own work. So thank you all for your good work.
Thank you, Taylor, for sharing all of that with us. And I believe Camisha wanted to contribute something. Thank you, Camisha.
Well, Taylor, just really moved by what you just said, and trying to remember what it was I wanted to say, because I was so moved by it. I just was thinking about, when the question was posed about what I was taking from the night, what really moved me, I was thinking about it as an exercise of deep listening and tuning in to one another, is echoing back the best of what we heard in one another's poetry, as a way of kind of creating our own environment, like this environment where we are actually connected. I also think just the structure of how we proceeded in the evening, allows us to create an environment where we are prioritizing one another and tuning into one another, from the ASL to CART to even just the brief comments back to one another as we were reading. This opportunity to create life-giving, good-feeling environments, to me, really requires us to think about each other. And I think that certainly the crisis in terms of the environment, it's about us not thinking about each other. It's about so many people in power putting personal gain over what it would take to really value life, in my opinion. So that's part of the reason I was attracted to Maddy's poems. It shines such a bright light on this decision that money is more important than people. And that certainly shows up in terms of disability justice and the level of inaccessibility and the number of people who think it's just too hard to make spaces accessible. And I think it just benefits everybody for us to create these sort of environments where we are really tuning into each other, where we're really putting, I don't know if you're willing to go here with me, but love at the center of what we do and how we create environments with one another.
Thank you so much, Camisha. I'm so moved by both what you said and what Taylor said. And I'm also grateful for all the interconnections that are being made. We're going to go over to Ona, who's been waiting patiently for a while. And then I just want to sort of telegraph that we're then going to open it up to the audience so we can bring some folks who are listening in. But anytime that you all feel so moved as we start bringing the audience in, you don't seem very shy. So I'm just encouraging you all to continue to let this flow as we start to hear gut responses from people who've been watching and participating out in the world. But Ona, over to you. And then for those of you who are watching, before Ona speaks, I'll just say, I'll repeat the question: what resonated, what touched you, what was true and what you've heard, both in the readings and also in the discussion. And if you want to raise your hand now, we'll look for you out in the audience and we'll bring a few of you up after Ona, or as Ona's speaking. Ona, please.
Well, this is such a wonderful, rich conversation. And Camisha, I'm with you. Love is in this room for sure. But something that I was thinking about, and Bryan, you were talking about a Zoom and using Zoom as a sacred space. And something I have noticed as a person with a disability is that there are ways in which, while most people's worlds have gotten smaller this past year, some of us, our worlds have gotten bigger because accessibility like this has become necessary for everybody. And in that idea that people are eroding and therefore joining the disabled community, this is a time when either because people became sick or because they were protecting themselves and each other, they had to make choices that we know about and do instinctively because we've done them for so long. So that's just something positive that I see that's come out of this difficult time.
Thank you so much, Ona. I couldn't agree more from the vantage of having done now 35 of these types of events addressing different subjects, but the opportunity to expand our worlds. And the first time I talked to Ekiwah, he said, now there are so many theater productions I can now attend from Mexico without leaving my home. And it's truly, it's like the technology is rising to meet us at the very moment we need it. But then we have to not rest on the laurels that we have this technology, because without spirit, it can be totally soul deadening to use it. But with intentionality, it can make all the difference and it can open up worlds. We have our first audience member joining us. I'm looking at the order here, and I think it's William. William, if you don't mind unmuting yourself, and we look forward to hearing from you. What touched you? What was true? What resonated with you tonight?
Well, I'm not a poet, and I'm not a wide reader of poet, but I had several thoughts coming to my mind as I listened. The first thought that came to my mind was that I thought about The Man with a Hoe, written during the late 1890s or so by, I think, Monty Markham. And I think it had to do with the environment and hard work. The second thing that I thought about was a poem by Richard Wright entitled Between the World and Me. While it was not directly environmental, it had to do with social conditions faced by African American. And all of these things resonated with me as I listened to each one of you tonight. And for Ekiwah, I am African American. I'm a 76-year-old man, and I have been enjoying Theater of War productions.
Thank you so much, William. I really appreciate you coming, and I know Ekiwah appreciates it too. I'm the last person to expound upon this in this conversation. There are so many more expert people here, but I love that you've brought in racial justice into this conversation in such a direct way, and the intersectionality of all of these movements. It seems like the perfect and most appropriate thing for the audience to bring forth right off the bat. So thank you so much, William. And I believe, Elaine, you are next in the order, and we'll come over to you, Elaine.
Wow. This is just, it's like a dream come true. I'm 71, and I've been writing poems since I was a child, and I've been writing songs for over 50 years. And one of the wonderful things about the technology right now is that, as you've been saying, we've been able to connect with people. I've been able to connect with people all over the world. And I'm low tech. So this was a new thing to get this webcam. And it was specifically because a young friend of mine had to leave and go back to Singapore. And I specifically really wanted to be able to stay in contact with her. So I believe that we, people with disabilities and people, like in Detroit, they have something called Black and Disabled Lives Matter. Put it together, yes. In fact, when you look at it, they're talking about racism is a public health issue. Yes, it is. But sexism is also a public health issue. And ableism is a public health issue. And ageism is a public health issue. And it's all revealed by what we're going through with COVID right now. And there's an explosion of creativity. Don't you feel it? And we're all of us who are here and are involved, we're all part of it. And so one of the songs that I wrote is We Want to Live. We do. We want to live. And one of the verses, it's a song that's got many verses, but for what we're doing tonight, Mother Earth lives in us. We want to live. Mother Earth lives in us. We want to live. The connection is as close as our breath or a drink of clean water.
Can I just say, Elaine, I really appreciate what you said and the connections between what you said, William, and what Elaine just said in terms of the movements around Black Disabled Lives Matter, very vivid and important, and how they are movements connected with ecology implicitly. I really appreciated the way you both articulated that so strongly and so centered, in such a centered way for all of us tonight.
And let's not forget being gender fluid, please.
Oh, I will never forget that. Don't worry.
Bless you all.
I sit beside you in secular blessings for that. Thank you for that. And I think we have someone else on deck here, as the expression goes.
The next is Cassandra.
Hi, Cassandra. Pale, white skin, short brown hair. A shirt that I got at the Lost and Found. I just want to say thank you and applaud you all. All of my disabilities, physical and mental, are invisible. Up until recently, a lot of my identity has been as well. So I have always felt on the outskirts of communities like this, that at the center of them have that love that everybody needs. Everyone said something that resonated with me. And especially Ekiwah, when you mentioned feeling crooked. That's how I felt my whole life. And it just feels so good to hear someone else say that. The poems were beautiful. The discussion was beautiful. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cassandra. I really appreciate that. It's so touching to hear you say that. And you've made something visible by your words that wasn't visible before. I want to bring a number of people coming onto the screen. This incredible group has lit up the board. The first time we did one of our projects, we scheduled a 45-minute discussion. This is 12 years ago, and the discussion lasted 3.5 hours and had to be cut off at midnight. And I promise we won't do that this evening. It's a work night, a school night, but we want to get some more voices onto the screen from people out in the world. And next in the line is Alana Sherman. Alana, if you wouldn't mind activating your video and joining us.
I'm having a little trouble activating the
Don't worry. Don't worry, Alana.
Is this okay?
Totally fine. Great to hear your voice.
My comment, I hope my comment isn't too rabidly political, first of all. But I wanted to bring up an issue that has gained a lot of, that's had a lot of resonance over the last 2 or 3 years. And it's the issue of proposed legislation to outlaw plastic straws and the very, very strong opposition from many disability rights organizations, including organizations that I belong to. In addition to applying that straw bans or even really limited straw bans violate the Americans with Disabilities Act, which they do not, the conflict has occasioned a really unfortunate conflict between disability rights, the disability rights movement and the environmental movement. And I'm wondering if anyone has any comment on this. It's happened all over the country. I happen to be very, very involved in the disability rights movement and in the environmental movement. And I'm a very strong proponent of these bans.
Thank you, Alana. You know, one of the other objectives of the work that we do is to complicate conversations, not to simplify them. So thank you for complicating the conversation.
I guess you're welcome, Bryan.
Maddy has her hand up. Maddy's your hand to respond to Alana? Great.
Yes.
Please.
So I certainly don't have all the information on this, but I think that a lot of environmental justice work that's being done currently focuses too much on what consumers can do for environmental justice and not enough on what businesses need to do for environmental justice. And that's just because legislation passing that limits the amount of harm that corporations can do to the environment is very difficult to pass because a lot of those corporations do a lot of lobbying and things get complicated and weird. So I think that the issue of plastic straws is, yes, a very complex one, but I am worried that it may be focusing its energy on the wrong source of economic harm, not economic harm, environmental harm. Although, you know, it is something very, very important to talk about. Yeah, I'm curious about what y'all think about that as well.
Thank you, Maddy.
Bryan, I think Christian wanted to add something in response to someone who had already spoken. And I think we also have a chat remark from one of our audience members, I believe, as well.
Yes, the chat remark is hemp plastic might solve many problems, and we'll let that float as well. People may want to respond to that. You know, what's also beautiful about this model is we're sort of creating palimpsests of themes, layering one on top of the other, but the poetry is already modeled that we have within us the capacity to make all of these connections and not to worry about each thread always resolving itself. So I love Alana's question. I love Maddy's response. And Christian, I know you wanted to respond to something that Cassandra said, and we don't want to lose that thread. So we'll come over to you. And I know people can continue to respond to Alana, and people can continue to respond to Christian and Cassandra and to Diane.
Alondra also wants to respond to Cassandra, it looks like. So a palimpsest, the idea of things layering on top of each other and being available in multiple formats, not just visually, of course, because we wouldn't be visually centric now, would we?
No, I love the idea of a multimedia palimpsest, moving in all directions, which is what we're trying to do in our limited way here. But I think that's what the future holds for communication. Christian, over to you. I know you wanted to respond to Cassandra.
Hi, Cassandra. Thank you so much for sharing. I was really struck by and resonated with what you said, because I also have like an invisible disability. I am autistic. I'm on the spectrum, and it's not something that I'm not something that I'm like even 100% open about in my like day-to-day life. It's in a lot of ways really invisible, and I have this kind of constant conversation in my head about like disclosure and about like feeling like I simultaneously don't belong within the non-neurotypical community, but also that I'm not neurotypical still. Like there's this like weird sense of invisibility that comes from having like invisible disorders. And I think even more generally, like part of being disabled or having something is this sense of invisibility, this sense of feeling othered or kind of marginalized, or like people kind of glimpse at you and then kind of look away. And I think the thing I love about poetry, and something that really brought me to it, is it's kind of a way of applying visibility to yourself. You know, like in my poem, I wrote a lot about the idea of potential and promise and what you can do. For me, it was a poem about potential. And I feel like poetry has always been a way of kind of showing myself and being like, I can do this. I can write about myself. I can express myself. I have potential. And the fact that you even have to justify that is unfortunate, but it's a part of the experience. And I feel like the beautiful thing about poetry, and something that really attracted me to it, is this sense of showing yourself as this being of joy and vitality and life and visible and totally there, not distilling yourself or making yourself glimpsed away, but just putting yourself at the forefront. You know, because so often I feel like disabled people kind of look at themselves or deal with a societal perception of themselves that they are translucent as people and spiritual beings, and it's not true. We are fully formed and real people with real lives and thoughts and opinions and everything beyond just our disability, you know. And I think that's the thing that I really love about poetry. And what I was saying earlier, the thing I really love about this like reading and everything, and the reason I feel so uplifted, is that these poems, they're about disability, they're about ecology, they're about this, but there's our life and our being poured into them. It's not just a poem about disability. It's a poem really about us. You know, they're poetry about us, and we just happen to be disabled. We're writing about life, you know, and that's something that really moves me. And I guess all this rambling is to say that I'm really glad that we can take this time to make ourselves visible, because I feel like that's really, really important.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Chris. I know Alondra also wanted to respond to Cassandra, and Taylor said he wanted to jump in too, and that's all fine. You know, we still have room and time in our schedule to accommodate many of the people who raised their hands. But Alondra.
Yes, I wanted to respond. So many things and so many great conversation. I'm sitting here like nodding my head very furiously, because I feel everything that's being said so much. But I specifically wanted to piggyback off of this idea of invisibility, and how sitting here and on a Zoom call with approximately 271 people, it's very hard to not feel invisible right now. And invisibility is something that I've been dealing with since the start of this, more than just the pandemic, the whole 2020, the whole spectrum, and also how that plays into me considering myself a person on the spectrum, or considering myself a person with a disability, and how, you know, sometimes I feel like I'm too invisible, almost see-through, and then how I don't belong. A lot of imposter syndrome comes in my head against with almost invisible disabilities, and if I should take a stand, if I'm someone who is just as see-through as the next person. And how, you know, we kind of use poetry to unveil ourselves in like the most badass way possible. And yeah, I'm losing my train of thought right now, so I think I'm gonna have to come back, but that's all that my brain wants to get out right now. So, yeah.
Thank you so much, Alondra. Over to you, Taylor, but there's no question that train of thought was very clear. Everyone here was fully tuned in, so don't even give it a second thought. Taylor.
Yeah, that train of thought resonates with me about invisibility and thinking about how sometimes we frame the conversation, art is speaking truth to power. And I think tonight we're witnessing art is power and disability is power. And disability threatens certain institutions that hold us back from imagining what a better future can look like. And I keep thinking about this as a professor of environmental studies, as someone, you know, why is it more important to take my students kayaking than to walk around the campus and say, how are the buildings designed to welcome people? Or why aren't our majors disabled students? Who are we keeping out? Who's part of the literature of inclusion? And that's the real hard work that we're doing tonight. I can feel it. I hope you're feeling it. And the work that's ahead of us is to not be invisible, to name it, to share it in safe places so that we feel, I hope, empowered to go forward and do this good, challenging work.
Thank you so much, Taylor. I see your hand, Ekiwah, but I'm going to come back to you if you don't mind, because we have 5 people who've been waiting patiently, and this is the order: Scott, David, Maria Eldy or Mari Eldy, Stephanie, and Kechi. And we're going to try to get them looped in. We'll go to Scott next, and then Ekiwah, I know you're there, and when the spirit moves you and we want to pull you back in, I know we will. But Scott, over to you. Well, Scott, you're still muted.
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, I want to say that I've been making poems for since I was 15. I was really impressed tonight, and I don't say that to be polite. My problem, which is what led me into literary craft, and it also very much ties into the environment. We must never forget that diet is a part of environment. Whole grain flour, yes, is healthier than refined flour. Whole wheat, as an example, rather than white wheat, brown rice rather than white rice, even in the grain. But I mean, the point is, I grew up in continual neuroagony all the time. This syndrome, I was labeled as a mental case. My mother, because it affects your behavior, infects your sensory input is affected. I was 31 years old before I could perceive the color and texture of a bird flying or sound well enough to play a harmonica, even though I passed optical and audio tests. The syndrome took my mother's life, similar symptomatology. I've been accused of things. I'm going to be quite frank. I've been accused of being fascist, transphobic, racist. But one telling factor is that those who make those accusations are never willing to meet me in an open debate about them. I tend to be critical and very much of myself. I wanted to say that the environment as it is has a lot to do. It very much directly affects our sensory input, all of us. I'm not a freak of nature, which I grew up believing I was. because I thought I was just in this rigid state of existence. I was too blasted to see that my mother suffered similar until her death, her passing on rather. I began to experiment with real food because I couldn't afford to eat a supermarket diet anymore. So I began to cook from scratch and I began to feel better. And I could go on all night because it was like peeling the layers of an onion. I took to literary craft because when the sensory input is suppressed, then the intellect, the part of the mind that works in words and numbers, works overtime. I was not allowed to finish the 9th grade. But when I was 24, which was just before I began to make the serious changes, actually, Professor Stephen Dunn at Stockton College in Pomona, New Jersey, Stockton State, invited me to sit in on his workshop in poetry, one of the courses he taught. Stephen was subsequently awarded the Pulitzer in poetry for the year 2000. So I had that amazing opportunity. Whatever may be said about me, I'm fair-minded. I run community work, not as much now. I'm in an isolated situation, which I was forced into. And there's just so much, and I've thought about it so much, but I'll try to be brief here, that I am living in Vermont. I'm not putting down the people or the culture, but I'm dying here because for one thing, the white supremacist movement has brought out a tendency in people to simply bully. So that I'm Jewish, but I've been picked on by people who don't necessarily know I'm Jewish. But the road, it's not safe for me to even walk the road because people with problems like mine often just give off odd subliminals. It's true. I'm sure that many of us here could relate to that, I would assume. So it's not even safe for me to take a walk. And I was bicycling 18 miles a day while living out of a van. So I'm not thriving in this environment. I should never have been forced to move here. But the housing was reserved for consumers of the mental health system. Even had I gone and gotten rubber stamped, because it so happens that in many places, particularly that I know of Philadelphia, you can be rubber stamped mentally ill. People get rubber stamped mentally ill to get benefits. But it still doesn't mean that I would have gotten that which I needed and to which I was entitled under the ADA, which would at least have my name put on a list for housing so I didn't have to move to an environment that is literally killing me. There's so much more to say. I want to thank Ms. Wiener, who has been very encouraging, and Elaine Kolb, who snuck up on me, and now I don't see where she is. We're hoping to get my songs down into recording so that they won't die with me. I don't care whether somebody uses them and makes money off them, as long as I'm credited as the, if you make a lot of money off it, it's either a cup of herbal tea or if you make $1 million, I want a tank of gas. But if you do, that is if I don't have a heart attack. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Scott. I'm grateful for everything you shared, and glad you were with us tonight.
I wanted to clarify that my diet and exercise were my medicine. And had I known that a long time, and many people, even if you don't need them in the same way, if your symptoms, they can help with diabetes. They can help. There's so many things are proven, and my mistake, you also need herbs. They're made of biochemicals. This is not fatism. Just because a corporation ain't making $1 billion off of it doesn't mean it ain't gonna work.
Thank you so much, Scott, for bringing your perspective and complexifying the conversation more and grounding it in such a powerful narrative and story, and for making visible the connection between the themes of tonight's event. Thank you so much. David, you've been waiting for a while, and David Griffiths, you are next.
Thank you. First, I just want to thank you and thank all of the poets and everyone for putting this on and making this happen. This is just such a wonderful, soul-filling experience. And I have so much that I feel like I want to say about pretty much everything that everyone has said so far, between the poems and the discussion. But I'll try to focus on just one aspect. The thing that has just continued to strike me all the way through, it's like I'm hearing echoed something that I've believed for, well, about as long as I can remember. And it's the idea that having a disability, living with a disability, makes us mindful of our environment, because whether or not our disabilities actually impact our physical mobility, still in so many ways, our disabilities shape how we move through and move within the world, and how we interact with the world, with our environment. And that goes beyond just the physical environment. It also causes us to be mindful of how we move through and interact with our social environment. So it just seems natural to me that disability justice is environmental justice, is racial justice, is economic justice, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it's all one thing. And so many times when I speak at or participate in events or meetings or things that are, supposed to be specifically about environmental issues, when I start talking, it seems like the able people in the audience are just confused. It's like they don't understand why I'm there, why I'm talking. And it seems like they're waiting for me to explain that connection between my experience as a person with a disability and my experience as a human being who inhabits the same environment that they do. And that sense of confusion or that waiting for that explanation has not happened here tonight. And it just feels like, the poetry and the discussion all just reflects this general mindfulness of how we exist in our environment. And I kind of feel like I'm starting to just ramble, so I'll stop for now.
Thank you, David. Rambling is totally permitted here. And you weren't rambling, you were making a lot of sense to a lot of people. You may not be able to see, maybe you can, but there are so many people nodding along and chatting along and smiling. Thank you so much for everything you brought to the conversation, what you validated in what's been said so far. Is it Maria Elde or Mari Elde? I'm famous for butchering names, so I apologize.
It's actually Maria Lino, but I can rename myself. And
Okay,
the
all right.
it's the way my family calls me, so it's okay. You're doing fine.
Thank you for clarifying.
That's okay. I would really like to thank you. This is extremely emotional to me, and so I try not to ramble. I wrote notes. And it's very, very emotional. Do I need to describe myself, or is that okay?
It is up to you.
Okay, I'm a very pale Latina. I'm Cuban, was born in Cuba. I'm a multidisciplinary artist. I have gray hair now. I'm letting it grow, and I'm wearing a denim blouse with scoop neck. That should be, so I can talk about what I really want to talk about, which is I've collaborated. I'm a multidisciplinary visual artist, and one of the things I've done is collaborated with a dance group here in Miami called Karen Peterson and Dancers, who incorporate performers with different types of ability and disabilities. So, but not the reason why I'm collaborating with them, but the reason I'm actually talking is because one of my brother had cerebral palsy. And his name was, and I say was, he passed away at age 41. What I can say from the experience of living with him, because he always lived at home, is that life comes in all forms and shapes. And it might be very selfish to say that it was such a joy and a blessing to have him. And I say that it might be selfish because I know that he also felt pain, physical pain, and he did have to go through a couple of surgeries to mitigate the pain. Not really, he was never able to walk, he was never able to talk. However, he could communicate with us. Even when social workers came by the house, they said, we can't do anything, you guys are communicating with him. And he had a great sense of humor. He loved to play with kids. The kids loved to play with him and get on top of his wheelchair. And you couldn't tell anything to the kids in front of him. Like, get out of his here, you're going to hurt. No, he loved that. So it was such a blessing. And I mean, I could go on and on about him. He had huge, big brown eyes with long eyelashes, black hair. He was very handsome. The other thing I want to comment is about the translators, the sign language translators. They're beautiful. Those hand movements are a dance. Maybe because, again, I've worked with performers and because I've done video art and I can't take my eyes off of them. And I don't understand sign language. So I'm not looking at them because, oh, let me see if they translate it correctly. No, it's because it's so beautiful what they're doing. Not only the service, but just the movement of their hands and their arms, and also the expression of their faces. So I want to thank you. I've been following Theater of War. The first time I saw Theater of War was in New York, because except for last year, because of the pandemic, I go to New York City very often and spend extended period of time. So I want to thank you. Thank you very much, and thank you in the name of my brother Ignacio. I used to draw him quite a bit, when he was with us physically, because he is with us, spiritually and emotionally. So I thank all of you. And again, life comes in all shapes, all forms, and all colors. And so thank you. Yes, as much as I can say right now. I'm going to start crying, so I better not say anything else.
Well, crying is also permitted without question in our space as well. But thank you, Maria. I really appreciate you telling Ignacio's story and bringing him into the space and sharing your perspective. And we have a few more hands we want to get through. And I just want to say to the poets, because you've all been sort of patiently, I know, taking in all the things that have been said, I want to leave some space for you all. I know some of you might be itching to come back into the conversation, and we'll see. We may not get to everyone who's out in the audience, but we have a few more that have been waiting patiently. So Stephanie, you are next.
Thank you. I also wrote a couple of things down in an attempt not to ramble, which is not my strong suit. I so appreciated this event, and I just want to say how moved I was by all of your poems and how amazing and beautiful everything you all wrote and have said was. And also really echo the point about Zoom. I have to use Zoom all the time at work and it is very fatiguing. However, I have participated in a ton of these theater of war Zooms, and it has really helped me through the pandemic. It's been so beautiful to open this up, something that I probably wouldn't have had access to otherwise. So appreciate that and the use of this technology. What caused me to raise my hand was something that Maddy said, which really resonated with me so much. You were like speaking my soul when you mentioned the point about when we focus on individual actions, like using straws, that we're not addressing the root of the problem. I work in environmental justice and health. And it's just, and you know, I don't use plastic straws if I get one here or there, or, you know, but if someone needs a straw, let them use a straw, right? Like if a straw comes in your glass, it's not the end of the world. I think that we tend to overemphasize and focus on individual behavior so much. And obviously we do so because of the way that our society has been structured, because we live in this, you know, capitalist oligarchy where, you know, as long as we're distracted by quabbling with one another about straws and balloons, we're never going to go after the actual corporations and systems that are causing all of these problems, including environmental degradation, you know, racism, ableism, and all of these different things. I just thank you so much for saying that. Like, right, that was so amazing to me. I think it also related to me, it called to mind back to me something that came up with one of the organizations that I work with at the local level. Was some folks were asking me about plastic balloon ban legislation. It was sort of reminded me, and it, a couple of people who were, or a few legislators who were involved in the legislative Black caucus in that state were saying, you know, we have a real concern about this legislation because, you know, it's being framed as it's good for the environment and we need to do this for the environment, but we know that this will have a disproportionate impact in our community because culturally this is something that people like, that some people in our neighborhood will do a balloon release like when someone passes, and this bill doesn't include anything about educating people about why we shouldn't be just releasing balloons. And we also know that our communities are already over policed, and we know this will have a disproportionate impact on communities of color. And so I think same idea, you know, when we focus on trying to put band-aids on major systems like racism and capitalism and ableism, we're not addressing the root cause of the problem, and we're really making the problem worse. So thank you so much for saying that. And also, Christian, I just wanted to say that what you said long before about the joy in the poems and how much you were moved by how joyful all of the poems were and how it was to have people think of your very identity as being negative or being something that's sad, that really just resonated and touched me. So thank you.
Bryan, is it okay if I quickly say something really, really fast?
By all means.
So a couple of things, this thing about rambling, which has become a thread in the conversation. I just want to say, I think rambling is often like layered and coded and negatively described as something people shouldn't do, but that's actually coming from a very typical understanding, or I guess I dare say a normative understanding of communication. And one of the things about disability justice in relation to ecology that I think is so beautiful and profound is that people have lots of different ways of communicating, not just lots of different embodiments. People have different emotional ways of being, and we are all expressing that in our multiplicity this evening. And I don't have to agree with every single thing every single person is saying. That's really fine. You know, the issue is that there's a complexity in how people interact. And this idea that we should be linear and then we should have A goes before B, which of course assumes a certain alphabet, which is bullshit. Then I said bullshit on camera and it's been recorded forever. And so, you
We
know,
welcome that too.
Word.
That's fine.
So, and Word, of course, is a reference to WERD in Atlanta, which is a reference to Dr. King's radio presence in Atlanta when so many of the radio stations didn't want to bother to broadcast his wisdom about the anti-racist struggle, speaking of making connections. So when people say Word, my best friend Clark taught me about that. That's where Word is from, W-E-R-D. So how do we think about rambling as part of an expression of disability expression itself? And the only other quick thing I was going to say about the straws, which is a gigantic subject, of course, is one of the ways to get at the straws issue is to ask the disabled people who use straws what they want to do about the straws. So instead of having all these non-disabled people make decisions about straws and how they affect disabled people who could die without the straws, maybe ask the disabled people who are using the straws what they would like to be doing about the straw situation. Centering the experience of the people affected most by the straw debate is the thing to do, I think.
Thank you so much, Diane. You know, your comments move me too. Get so much of our work. I'm so grateful to all the people who come to our previous events, who come to this event, who sort of shouted out the work that we do. But I think about this question about rambling all the time too. You know, I've been in audiences, physical audiences, where people recoil when someone gets up and talks for in an unregulated way, or in a way that where they're not, it's not succinct in the mind of the people who are watching. And the question I keep, because we work with around trauma as well as a company, and I keep thinking, well, what do you think trauma sounds like? You think it sounds like aphorisms or you know, pithy little statements? And there are so many ways that you know, just in our exchanges so far since you came into our lives, Diane, that I've just been learning about, you know, the very thing that we've been doing in this environment over and over and over again, and creating space for, is a more complicated and beautiful and poetic way of communicating than I think in normative spaces. And it doesn't have to even start with a poetry reading. It could just be a long, so to speak, ramble. And it has as much prosody and as much rhetoric and as much structure and as much intelligence as the poems. And I see it night after night after night. So I'm really grateful to everything you said. Kechi, you'll correct me. I know you've been waiting for a long time, and over to you, please.
Okay, my name is Kechi. I'm a 17-year-old brown-skinned girl with black hair and Bantu knots. And I wanted to thank everyone that shared today. There are a lot of different things that resonated with me. One thing that I'd like to touch on was I really enjoyed, firstly, the poem Industrial Complex and like the reading of it. It was very interesting to me, and it was like a different kind of form than what I'm used to, but I really liked it. And also, another thing that stuck out to me was what Ekiwah said, with how, like, although you might not say like be disabled now, like it could very much be you in the future, and it's kind of like just a progression thing and stuff like that. And that, although it's not something that I think about a lot, it stuck with me, because like in my family, like on my mom's side, there's like a history of blindness, and like my grandmother's blind, and it's kind of like a thing as you age and you get it. And so although it isn't something that I've thought about a lot, it is something that could be my future. So it was really like impactful hearing that. And yeah, I just want to thank everyone here today.
Thank you so much, Kechi. It's so wonderful to have younger voices, both as poets, but also as audience members receiving the poetry as part of this framework. And I'm really grateful if you're waiting so long. I'll just add that Taylor's reference to diabetes touched me similarly, as someone who lost a father to diabetes. Erosion is such a powerful metaphor, but also sort of intergenerational, the way a disability or a disease can play out over generations. and this idea of planning for the future generation and passing wisdom, and how that relates to environmental justice and our consciousness of not just our family and the next generation, but the generation after that. And I'm just grateful for that as well. Ekiwah, you've waited a really long time. Now this is a test, Ekiwah, to see if you can thread the needle of your thoughts from 25 minutes ago to the present moment. No pressure, but I wanted to come back to you. I know you had your hand up, really. Except you remain muted, unfortunately. There you are.
Thank you. There's so many spirals weaving in the air. That's beautiful to see. So thank you, Bryan, for bringing us together. All the people that brought us together. I don't even know who you all are, but this is something that I think goes way past this particular event and whoever is listening to us now. It's really planting an environmental disability justice seed that I would like to figure out a way to keep feeding, because it feels like this is just the tip of the iceberg, and not in a climate change sort of way, but in the opposite direction. And when we were talking about invisibility, I wanted to bring to mind two groups of people that are also invisible in the disability community often, and that is prisoners that through getting shot and often involved in migrant-related situations or drug use or drug transport, how they end up in jail and with a disability, and how that's one of the things that is going to happen through chaos climate is we're going to have more forced migration to other places where people get on the backs of trains in very dangerous places and often end up with a disability in that passage, looking for colder or warmer climates or friendlier environments. And I had the privilege of reading to some disabled prisoners in a high security prison. And it was a space where poetry and disability and the environment converge, because they were given an hour to just be in the garden listening to poetry. And you know how usually we have to butter our poems up and explain a lot. And in that space, what was so amazing is that nothing needed to be explained, and poetry in and of itself was enough. And it was part of everything that was concentrated in that moment, like the confinement made all the colors and all the sensations grow sharper. And now, at least in Mexico, these prisoners are unable to receive any visitors and have been for the longest time because of the pandemic. And I understand that, but on the other hand, it puts them in a very, very difficult situation. And so along that note, I feel inspired that if there's anybody that wants to share poetry or a poem, all this is really well and good, but we're poets after all. So I feel greedy like a little pig in the poem to get back to poetry.
That's a lovely idea, Ekiwah. I'm going to let that float, because maybe one of our poets would like to respond with a poem that would be maybe the final word of this conversation. Not that we ever want to tie a bow or pretend like we've resolved any of these many complex themes that have been teased out tonight. But before we do that, maybe one of the poets, you know who you are and you have something that you feel is appropriate.
Poetry back into the conversation. Poetry is my native language, but I discovered the unique power of poetry in a course I took at Oberlin on eco-poetics. I think eco-poets understand the power of poetry many might overlook or forget. I love words shifting, morphing like the earth's underbelly. One eco-poet said it this way, quote, "Poetries are social documents that express relationships within ecosystems. I like to think this process recalibrates the social, how we function dynamically in space, in time, with each other, communally, communicational." End quote. In essence, we are all made up of matter, and so must each care for the other.
Beautiful. It's unclear to me, DJ, whether that was a poem or a statement, but I presume that was by design. And I'm grateful to you for answering that call. Christian, I know you wanted to respond, and then David has offered to read a short poem to close us out. So Christian, over to you, and then David, you're going to have no pressure to last word with your short poem. Christian, or sorry, Christian or Christopher asked to speak. Sorry, Christopher.
I just wanted to return to Diane's point about rambling and about communication. I have a study, which thankfully did not choose to raise ugly head tonight, but often has, and especially in situations where I feel that I must speak, it has often been an interference. And so I really appreciate that point. And I think the point about poetry as being a unique form of communication, that while it is rooted in language, has a kind of extra linguistic quality. There's a kind of affect that can bring all of us together, even in the absence of speech or in addition to speech. And so I just wanted to echo that point, and call on everyone to ramble for as long as they can.
Thank you so much, Christian. You've authored, Christopher. You've authored a new mission statement for Theater of War Productions. So I appreciate that. To ramble.
Rambling welcomed.
Wrangling always welcomed. So no pressure, David, but you offered to read a short poem, and I love the spontaneity of this. Over to you, David. I think you're muted still. David?
Hello?
Yes.
Can you hear me now?
We can, yes. Go right ahead.
Okay. This is a thing I call Healing the Lame. And it was inspired by an encounter I had at a bus stop in Denver. She wept and said, "Jesus can heal you." I laughed and said, "Physician, heal thyself." She knelt and said, "If you accept him as your savior, you can rise up out of your wheelchair." I rose and said, "If you accept me as your equal, you can rise up out of your ignorance. Your book says we are all made in the image of God, even me. Can you stand to see your God in a wheelchair? That Jehovah, he's a real joker. We're all divine, that's the punchline. Gaze in awe upon the wonder that is me, and the voice of God shall say unto you, nobody's perfect, friend, get used to it."
Thank you so much, David. Everyone here is applauding in each in our own way. What an amazing evening, an incredible exchange. We knew it was going to be powerful, but impossible to know on how many levels. We didn't come here to tie a bow on this conversation, or even to say that we've in any way rounded the corner on making all the connections between these important themes tonight. We hope that the conversation that was started will continue in lots of ways, from this screen radiating out into your places of work and worship and where you live, and when the pandemic is over, on public transportation and out into the world. But we do have a couple of things we close with as benedictions, and the one benediction I want to offer to you all, that we offer almost all of our audiences, is simply this: if you related to anything that was said in this conversation here tonight, or in the poems that you heard, you're not alone in this virtual room. You're not alone across the country and the world, as evidenced by people who've been joining us from other countries and participating. And most critically, you're not alone across culture and time. And the poem it's not Zoom that is the technology that has brought us to that realization. It is the poetry that catalyzed the exchange that led to us to this place of seeing our interconnectedness, interdependence, and mutual aid, and all the things that were brought into this conversation. And I want to thank Diane Wiener for being such a gracious and wonderful co-host. And you're so hired. We're going to be leaning up in the future. And I want to thank our incredible 10 poets for their contributions tonight. All of you are incredibly inspiring human beings, and I was personally floored by everything that was said. I want to thank our partners, and there are too many to mention right now, but you heard them at the beginning, and we'll post stuff about them on our social as well afterwards. And we will also post, we hope, we're going to ask the poets to send us some links to their most recent work they want us to make you aware of. So on our social, we can put some of those links up. So if you want to dive deeper into their latest works, you can, especially the published ones. We also want to invite you to another performance, actually a slew of performances. And now that you've joined us for this one, you'll be getting invited. But I just want to let you know that in 2 weeks, Theater of War Productions will be presenting the Suppliants Project, which is our project on immigration and the refugee crisis, and all of its interdependent connections to the conversation tonight will be apparent when we perform the play that we're performing that night for a large international audience. That's on the 14th of April. And then on the 27th of April, Theater of War Productions is presenting our Oedipus project, framed around questions of climate and ecological justice, using a reading of Sophocles' Oedipus the King. And this will be part of the Nobel Prize Summit, the first ever Nobel Prize Summit. And you're all invited. It's a public event. We want to make sure that as many of the voices that we heard here tonight that had such incredible insight into these interconnected themes are heard in that discussion on a large global scale. So we really want you to come back, and we hope we'll be looking for you, and we'll be creating space for you because the world needs to hear not just those who were here tonight, but this even larger event we have coming up, the Oedipus Project, which, by the way, I know we're out of time, but you know, one of the central characters in Oedipus the King is a blind prophet named Tiresias, and blindness and sight is one of the themes that plays throughout the play. And Tiresias's first lines when he comes to Thebes, which is being beset by an ecological collapse and a pandemic or an epidemic that's killing and ravaging not just Thebes, but the crops, the people, the livestock. He says, how terrible it is to know when in the end, knowing gains you nothing. I knew this once, but must have forgotten. Otherwise, I would never have come. And so we invite you to think about that line and come to that performance, because I imagine we could talk for another 8 hours about that in the context of what we talked about tonight. You can follow us at Theater of War on social media channels. We'll try to post stuff on Instagram regarding the poets tonight. And I know that some of the poets have requested that we stick around when the broadcast ends. And unfortunately, we have never done that before. So what we might do is send you all a quick link after the broadcast is over. And if those of you want to join us just to say a goodbye in a private space, you can, but there'll be no pressure because we're not able to end the broadcast and then keep you here. So look out for an email in just a couple of minutes if you want to join again. I know some of you have to go. Thank you to our ASL interpreters. Thank you to our CART and captioners. Thank you to everyone who joined us on screen, and all of those who were out there who maybe wanted to come on screen but didn't make it. We hope you'll come to the next event and be part of it. And check out our partners like Wordgathering and 9 Mile Press and the Burton Blatt Institute and the Alliance for Young Artists and Writers and all of their great work. It's been an absolute honor and pleasure being with you all tonight. A real highlight of the hopefully latter part of this pandemic. And I'm sending you all our immense gratitude and best wishes for the spring months to come. Good night, and we'll see you soon.
Good night, everyone. Thanks for being